Another U.S. block on Chinese companies. The Biden administration imposed trade bans on 5 Chinese firms over concerns of forced labor in Xinjiang. China's space program appears to serve military purposes first and civilian needs second. A U.S. expert says that China could use its space program to cripple the American economy, sending it back towards the 1970s. How long does it take the Delta virus variant to spread from one person to another? A surveillance video shows that it can make the jump in as little as 14 seconds. The Chinese ambassador to the U.S. is stepping down, but will his successor become another wolf warrior diplomat or a sheep? One Westerner's fascination with traditional Chinese culture took him to China, but the experience didn't live up to his expectations. It was only after he returned to the U.S. did he find the true China he had dreamed about. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The White House announced Thursday that the U.S. imposed trade bans on 5 Chinese companies over concerns of forced labor against Uyghurs in Xinjiang. The White House is banning U.S. imports of a key solar panel material from Chinese Hoshin silicon industry. It also restricted exports to Hoshin, another paramilitary firm, and 3 other Chinese firms. The U.S. Labor Department also added to a blacklist polysilicon produced with forced labor in China. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has denied allegations of genocide and forced labor in Xinjiang. Some of the Chinese firms are major manufacturers of monocrystalline silicon and polysilicon used in solar panel production. Hoshin Silicon Industry said earlier that it does not export industrial silicon to the U.S. directly. That would limit the impact of the ban. One of the 5 companies, Xinjiang Dago New Energy, said that it has zero tolerance towards forced labor and does not directly sell or buy from the U.S. So there would be no significant impact on its business. About 80% of all polysilicon used in solar module production across the world is from China. And within China, more than half is from Xinjiang. A group of Republican Congress members, led by House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, are calling for more action and holding the CCP accountable for how they handled the virus outbreak. NTD's Steve Lance brings us more from the Capitol.
Top House Republicans Wednesday announced a plan to hold the Chinese regime accountable for covering up the CCP virus outbreak. Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, along with 6 of his Republican colleagues, including Minority Whip Steve Scalise and GOP Chair Elise Stefanik, had some harsh words for the CCP.
The evidence is very clear. China lied and Americans died. We want justice for the American people, transparency for the American people, and accountability for the more than 600,000 Americans who lost their lives from the COVID-19 virus.
Leader McCarthy made it clear that his Democratic colleagues should join the effort in calling out China in the way that they handled the CCP virus outbreak. He said that this is not a Republicans versus Democrats issue.
But we need to first start by declassifying the intelligence for the entire world to know where COVID came from. We need to work with the international community to relocate the 24th Winter Olympic Games. If China would lie to the world where millions died, why would the world reward them with another Olympics?
The congressman held this press conference in part because they said their Democrat colleagues have not been quick enough to act when it comes to holding China accountable, but said they were hopeful Democrats would join the effort with more tenacity.
I have talked to several of my colleagues, rank and file members, and there are Democrats that want to get to the bottom of it. What we have to do is make it a priority for the committee.
To have an official congressional hearing, the majority party makes the final decision. House Republicans are calling on Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats to make this a priority. They say this is owed to the hundreds of millions of Americans who have been impacted by the CCP virus. Steve Lance, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
A surveillance video in China shows that it only took 14 seconds for the Delta virus variant to spread from one person to another. That's the shortest contact time recorded during China's latest surge in virus cases. This happened at a restaurant in South China's Guangdong province. Local police released the footage on Monday. It shows 2 women, one surnamed Huang and another surnamed Liu, entering the same bathroom separately. 14 seconds later, Liu left the bathroom, but little did she know that she was already infected. Wang was one of the first infected patients in Guangzhou City. She only met Liu in the bathroom without any physical contact. A Chinese state-owned media reports that the outbreak in the city originated from a local tea house. In it, Huang met someone she knew and walked over to greet him. In less than 2 minutes, the other person infected Huang with a virus. 4 days later, she passed the virus to Liu. The Delta variant has dominated the surge in virus cases in Guangdong. It is highly transmissible and was first identified in India. What is the goal of China's space program? An American space expert tells NTD Business host Paul Graney that their goal is military above everything else. He says China is catching up to America's space program, and this may be able to damage the space order. NTD's Don Ma has more.
U.S.-based space and national security expert Brandon Weikirk says China's space program could pose a threat to the U.S. That's because their program is for military purposes first and civilian purposes second. His remarks come shortly after China launched a crew to its space station. And equipped on the Chinese space station is an apparatus that is a cause for concern, a robotic arm capable of moving 20-ton objects. The Chinese regime claims that the grappling arm is for helping spaceships dock. But here's Weikirk's perspective.
But as we all know, in space, technology is dual use. So China in peacetime could use that grappling arm to help ships dock, but in wartime, they could use that to pluck our satellites from nearby orbits and push them out of orbit or sabotage them.
Weikirk says it's not just the grappling arm that is raising concern. China is also planning to equip a laser on the space station.
China planners have talked about installing a large laser when their station is completed in orbit. Now, they say in peacetime the laser would be used to clear orbital debris. But in wartime, that laser could potentially be used to blind sensitive American satellites in orbit. And China's space program is military at first and civilian second, whereas the American space program is flipped.
The American economy is heavily dependent on its satellites. It could be devastating for the U.S. if the satellites go out of commission.
We have, $1 trillion washes across the world daily through electronic transactions. They require satellites. If you lose those satellites, you're gutting the global economy, the American economy specifically. You could send us back to a pre-1970s era.
Beijing has been rapidly advancing its space agenda in recent years, and it's quickly closing the gap between its program and the American space program. Just last week, China sent into orbit a group of apparent military surveillance satellites, possibly for the purpose of radar imaging in China's surrounding areas.
Are we prepared for any potential interference from malevolent actors like the Chinese Communist Party?
No. The military, in my book, I open with a space Pearl Harbor. Both China and Russia have worked on reorganizing their forces since 2010 to fight and win a space war against the Americans.
Weikirk says the U.S. Space Force needs to strengthen its defense capability if it wants to protect American satellites.
Ultimately, Space Force is going to need to not just defend our satellites now, they're going to need to develop systems and doctrines for protecting American commercial interests and colonies throughout the solar system over the next decade, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years. This is how the Chinese are thinking, and by the way, the Russians are...
China's recent launches are far from its last. U.S. media Space News reports that China is planning some 40 more launches this year. Don Ma, NTD News.
Coming up, the longest-serving Chinese ambassador to the U.S. is stepping down. Is his successor a wolf warrior or a sheep? And where will the change leave U.S.-China relations? More on that after the break.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.
One of China's wolf warrior diplomats is leaving the U.S., and his departure has many wondering whether another wolf will replace him or if a sheep is next in line. Chinese ambassador to the U.S., Qiu Tiankai, is leaving office this week after serving 8 years in the position. He says U.S.-China relations are now at a critical crossroads. Media outlets report that China's deputy foreign minister will step up as his successor, 55-year-old Xinjiang. Ding Chen is a senior research fellow for Asian studies at Washington-based think tank the Heritage Foundation. In an interview with Voice of America, he said Washington may face a more intense clash as the new ambassador steps up. When making the remark, Dean quoted Xinjiang's response to growing doubt surrounding Chinese-made vaccines.
Some countries smear and defame China without a basis or a bottom line. Wolf warrior is not enough to describe what they do. They are indeed big bad wolves.
Xinjiang started his career as a diplomat some 30 years ago. He worked as the minister of the Chinese embassy in Britain and was promoted to deputy foreign minister in 2018. He's also accompanied current Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping on many foreign visit occasions in recent years. Bloomberg reporter Peter Martin says if Xinjiang is confirmed for the position, it would show Xi Jinping could care less about the candidate's experience on handling China-U.S. relations. Martin says the appointment reflects political reliability as perhaps more important than professional experience in the base country. NTD current affairs commentator Tang Jingyuan says it's Xi Jinping's bilateral policy that determines whether Xinjiang will become a wolf warrior or a sheep after taking the stage.
If Xi Jinping feels tremendously frustrated, he can also back off and keep a low profile. A recent example being that he ordered the CCP propaganda to change its face and wear sheep's clothing.
Some media are already collecting Xinjiang's so-called golden quotes spoken throughout his career, including his describing U.S. B-52 bombers as paper tigers and his faith in the Chinese regime's military.
The Chinese People's Liberation Army is not just a Boy Scout with a red tasseled gun.
It is unclear when his new title will take effect. Hong Kong pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily announced its closure on Thursday after printing its last publication. That comes after an expanded national security investigation into the newspaper.
Hong Kongers are lining up in the rain on Thursday to buy the final issue of Apple Daily. The pro-democracy newspaper is being forced to close. Hong Kong authorities froze its assets and arrested top editors under the city's Beijing-imposed national security law. Hundreds of supporters gathered outside the newsroom on Wednesday night, holding up their smartphones in lieu of lighters to show support.
I would like to thank supporters outside. 2 points. I would like to thank my colleagues and supporters outside.
Journalists on the balcony responded with their own phone lights. One of the newspaper's reporters, May, went outside to distribute free copies to supporters. She was in tears.
I actually don't want to leave them, and I also don't want to say farewell to my readers. We have no choice but to say goodbye for the time being. I hope that the people of Hong Kong will fight on, and stay safe is the priority.
The crowd burst into applause once the final edition was sent to press. The last front page features a photograph of staff waving to supporters, with the headline, "Hong Kongers bid a painful farewell in the rain." The flagship tabloid has long been a provocative critic of China's Communist Party leadership. Its hard-hitting political news and pro-democracy angle made it a thorn in the side for Beijing. Its demise leaves only a handful of independent media outlets still operating in the city.
After today, there is no press freedom in Hong Kong. When tonight's newspaper edition has become our final edition, I cannot see any future in Hong Kong. I feel very disappointed and angry today. I don't understand why our limited group, company, and the newspapers were forced to stop operating under such circumstances.
Apple Daily was founded in 1995 by self-made tycoon Jimmy Lai. He was arrested and jailed last year for attending pro-democracy rallies.
A top Chinese official who's rumored to have defected is now appearing in public. That's the first time after rumors started to circulate that he had defected to the U.S. with information about the origins of the CCP virus. According to minutes released by a CCP commission, the Vice Minister of the State Security Department, Dong Jingwei, attended a security meeting inside China on Wednesday. Chinese state media CCTV also released some footage of him, but did not mention his name in the report. His appearance seems to have refuted rumors about the defection. Meanwhile, media outlet Spy Talk, which is among the first to report on the rumor, is correcting the record. They said that a U.S. government official reached out to them, saying their previous report is not accurate. The official said they cannot confirm or deny where Dong is exactly. But not everyone is convinced. Media outlet Red State was the first to report on the defection rumor. Their editor says she believes Dong was being photoshopped into the photo. Senior member of the Republican National Committee, Solomon Yue, claims that the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency still has Dong in protective custody. One Westerner's fascination with traditional Chinese culture took him to China. But the experience didn't live up to his expectations. It was only after he returned to the U.S. did he find the true China he had dreamed about, in a most unexpected place. We sit down with Jared Madsen to hear his story. Reading Chinese philosophy isn't exactly the norm for most Americans. But Jared Madsen is a rare exception. For him, traditional Chinese culture isn't something too remote or irrelevant. Instead, the ancient wisdom in it gave him new perspective.
So when I was in high school, I already started to learn Chinese, and I started to learn about traditional Chinese culture. I was very fascinated. It just seemed to talk about things that I'd never even imagined, about Confucianism and Taoism. And then I went to China. I went to China in 1994.
But the trip didn't go according to plan.
It seemed right the very moment I landed in China, it was a wake-up call. Oh, this is communist society. This is not this anymore. Honestly, I was incredibly disappointed, and it was very disheartening, I suppose.
The experience didn't measure up to his expectations, but eventually, Madsen found what he had thought was a lost cause. Not in Beijing, but in New York. He is now a master of ceremonies for U.S.-based classical Chinese dance company Xinjiang. He says that's where he discovered the true China before it was tainted by the Communist Party.
Then I heard about Xinjiang, and I came to Xinjiang and I thought, this is exactly what I had been interested in from the get-go. And then we can portray it on stage, things that I'd been thinking about, only trying to imagine what it was like in my head. And then I get to see it on stage. I get to see people portray these roles. I was blown away. I had to be part of Xinjiang.
The classical Chinese dance style Xinjiang performs in is an antiquity dating back at least 3,000 years to the grand courts of Chinese emperors. And from that ancient tradition, Madsen found answers that modern science and technology couldn't give him. Why do you think it's important to have this push for authentic Chinese culture, especially nowadays when there's so much pushing for modernization and these alternative views? Like, why is it so significant?
Yeah, we're losing our connection. You know, we're becoming more and more like robots. You know, I think everybody feels that. You know, we all have cell phones, and it's great. We can look anything up, and it has all these advantages. But at the same time, I mean, this is a hot topic these days, right? Like people going off into the forest to do a retreat, right? To get rid of technology. Really, this is what they're looking for. What does it mean to be human? Some of these deeper questions that when you come to Xinjiang, we explore these.
Madsen believes classical arts are universal. Just like you don't have to be German to appreciate Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, audience members don't need to be Chinese to get inspired by Xinjiang. You mentioned that there are a lot of similarities and like universal values between classical Chinese history and Western tradition. So what are some of those similarities?
Well, one of the biggest ones that you see on the stage is the idea of a hero. What it means to be an upright person, what it means to be a hero, what it means to face the bad guy and valiantly strive forward. This is something that I think is deep within all of us. We all want to make something of ourselves. We all want to move forward. This is not a cultural thing. This is just being human. It's an incredibly uplifting show. This is something that lasts with people.
Existential threats have plagued traditional Chinese culture for the last century. That's following the Chinese Communist Party's rise to power and its attempts to eliminate those traditions. persecuting intellectuals and scholars, smashing temples, historical statues, and other cultural relics, and denouncing all traditional ideas as feudal and backward. Only after Mao's Cultural Revolution brought Chinese society into turmoil and bankrupted the ultra-left ideology did the CCP turn back toward ancient culture, this time using it to resuscitate its own totalitarian ideology by provoking national pride in the Chinese people. And the Chinese Communist Party also talks about traditional Chinese culture, but how is that different from what Xinjiang represents?
Well, they started doing it recently, and when they do talk about traditional Chinese culture, they use it to try to end up promoting communism.
Xinjiang is soon to perform its first show since the pandemic shut down theaters over a year ago. Madsen said he can't wait to once again time travel to ancient China, together with audiences.
Everybody just wants to get back out there. They want to see something. And I've met so many people who, during the pandemic, who wanted to see Xinjiang, and they're like, oh, I had tickets, and then it all got canceled. So I guess it's that yearning in society, that feeling of, that cabin fever, being at home for, months and months, over a year. How has it changed my approach? I don't know. I guess I'm just extra excited this year.
Xinjiang will take the stage this weekend for its first 2021 performance at the Palace Theater in Stamford, Connecticut. It's scheduled for this weekend. Those hoping to catch a last-minute glimpse can visit the company's website for ticket information. Protests around the entire globe on Tuesday. Concerned citizens are saying that China shouldn't be allowed to host the 2022 Olympic Games because of its human rights issues. NTD's Ariane Pazdar has more from the New York City protest.
We are here in front of the Chinese consulate in Manhattan. The people protesting here don't want the 2022 Winter Olympics to be held in China. And the main reason for that is China's ongoing genocide of the Uyghurs, an ethnic minority. The Chinese Communist Party puts those people in concentration camps, brainwashes and tortures them. But the Uyghurs aren't the only minority suffering from persecution in China. Falun Gong practitioners are also subject to persecution, labor camps, and even live organ harvesting. And that's been going on for over 20 years now. China invaded and took over Tibet in the 1950s. Many Tibetans had to flee to India in order to avoid persecution.
My parents died living in India with everyday wishful thinking of returning to Tibet, but it never happened.
In 1936, Nazi Germany held Olympic Games in Berlin. Some see strong similarities between the two controversial events.
The Beijing Winter Olympics is the closest things to 1936 Nazi Olympics because both games will be hosted against the backdrop of ongoing genocide.
Activist committees are now pushing for action.
The number one thing to do is either try to get this Olympics moved from China to elsewhere, or if it's happening in China, just boycott it.
June 23rd is World Olympics Day, and this is just one of many protests happening around the world on 6 continents in total. These people are calling on different nations and companies to boycott the games in China. Ariane Pazdar, NTD News, New York.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, be sure to check out our next special report on Epoch TV. Wall Street's love affair with the Chinese regime is no secret, but it's becoming more of a concern.
So our priority is not to get access for Goldman Sachs in China. Our priority is to make sure that we are dealing with China's trade abuses that are harming American jobs.
As Beijing's autocratic regime furthers its goals to replace the U.S. as the world's leader, it begs the question, do we really want big banks to get even more involved with the Chinese regime? It could end with them funneling more American investors' money, your money, into communist China, all while boosting their economy, funding their military, and facilitating their human rights abuses. That's on top of the fact that some of these are passive investments that most Americans don't even know about. In this special report, we explore how exactly Wall Street funnels money into China, what the magnitude of the wealth transfer is, and the regime's unsettling ultimate purpose for buddying up with Wall Street. To find out, check out our next special report on Epoch TV or NTD's cable TV this Friday at 9 p.m. China in Focus is partnering with the platform, and that's where you can watch our exclusive content every Friday night. In them, we'll explore questions like how China lures in foreign companies to steal their technology, how the Chinese regime is actively collecting health data on people around the world, how the ancient Chinese philosophy of good governance differs from the current-day communist regime, and much more. Be sure to check out these investigative episodes by clicking on the link in the description down below. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you really want to understand what's happening with China. You can still watch our Monday to Thursday episodes for free on YouTube, NTD Cable TV, the NTD website, and the Epoch TV website. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.